Well, good afternoon, everybody. I welcome everybody to our NGA summer meeting. I want to once again thank Governor Raimondo and all the citizens of the great state of Rhode Island. This is a record number of governors. This is a record number of attendees that we have here today. I'm now honored to introduce the Vice President of the United States of America, who, as you know, a year ago sat right with us, voted on our NGA resolutions. But most importantly, as a governor, he understands the challenges that we all face, how to grow our economies, how to build an infrastructure of transportation, how to make sure that our children are getting the best quality education. He understands that we want to work together in a bipartisan way. We want to work together on infrastructure. We want to work together on tax reform. And we want to work together on health care so that we can provide the best quality health care for our citizens. I thank Vice President Pence. He showed true backbone himself in Indiana when he expanded Medicaid for his citizens. So he understands the challenges that we as governors face to make sure that we're providing that quality care. So it's my honor today, as chairman of the National Governors Association, to bring to the podium, to work with the governors in a bipartisan way, the Vice President of the United States of America, Michael Pence.
I'm going to go down and say hi to everybody.
Good. No, go right ahead. Yeah, great idea. All right.
Well, thank you all. It is wonderful to be here. To Prime Minister Trudeau, Governor McAuliffe, thank you for that warm introduction and that warm welcome. To Governor Sandoval, to all the governors of these United States, especially our host, Gina Raimondo, to all the distinguished guests who are here with us today, it is an honor to be back in Rhode Island at the 109th Annual Summer Meeting of the National Governors Association. And I bring greetings today from my friend, a champion of federalism who is fighting every single day to restore power to the states and to the people, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. You know, the President is actually returning as we speak from France, where he celebrated America's first and oldest alliance with great pageantry and a productive meeting. I spoke to the President aboard Air Force One this morning, and he asked me to convey his thanks to all of you for your service to your states and to give you his best regards. And our president sent me and several members of our cabinet here to reaffirm our administration's commitment to partner with each and every one of you to advance the security and prosperity of all of the American people and all of the states across this country. Now, for me, it's great to be back at the NGA. I'm frankly very humbled to be with so many of the leaders I had the privilege to serve with when I was governor of the state of Indiana. You know, it's amazing for me to think. My wife and I reflected on it this morning that it was 1 year ago this weekend that the phone call came and my life changed. I reflected this morning on that ancient verse that I often thought about in those days. Who am I, O Lord, and who is my family that you brought me this far? So let me just take this personal opportunity to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for your friendship, your encouragement, and the prayers that have enabled us to serve in this new capacity. It is great to be back with America's governors. Now, I'm here as your vice president, but I want you to know that I bring the perspective of a former governor to your discussions this weekend. You know, when I was governor, I'd often come to Washington, D.C., representing my state's interest, and my greatest hope was that I'd have an administration that would listen to me and work with me to improve the lives of the hardworking people of Indiana. Well, let me give you this promise. Every governor in America has all that and more in President Donald Trump. You heard it from the president himself when he addressed the NGA at the White House during your winter meeting earlier this year. As the president said, and I quote, "Under my administration, we're going to have a true partnership of collaboration and cooperation with the states." And he meant every word of it. Since day one of our administration, President Trump has been delivering on this promise. In the past 6 months, President Trump has met with governors from no fewer than 47 states individually and 5 territories, including all of you that are gathered here today. In June alone, President Trump welcomed 19 governors to the White House, and he met with 3 more on the road. President Trump has involved you in our policy discussions, and let me assure you, this president values your continued input on issues ranging from infrastructure to energy to tax cuts to health care and so much more. And if you haven't noticed, this president likes to hire governors. Not just present company, but I'm talking about our United Nations ambassador, Nikki Haley, Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, our Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, and the new United States ambassador to China, who was the longest-serving governor in American history, Ambassador Terry Branstad. Let's give all these former governors a round of applause. You know, it really has been a privilege for me to continue to work so closely with all of you on the President's behalf. In February, Karen and I enjoyed welcoming many of you to the Vice President's residence in Washington, D.C. The first time all of America's governors, I was told, have ever been invited to the Naval Observatory, and we were honored that so many came. Now, my wife couldn't be with us today. She's picking our daughter up from the airport from doing some foreign travel. But let me personally extend the President's and our family's heartfelt appreciation to the most important people in the room today, the spouses and family members of those who serve as governors across this nation. Could you give a round of applause to our spouses and family members that support the leadership of these great leaders? The truth is, America's governors have a friend in President Donald Trump. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. This president's agenda will continue to strengthen every state across this country. You know, I like to say that our president has a 3-part agenda: jobs, jobs, and jobs. And to be around him for any period of time, you know he's focused on prosperity in this country as more than anything else other than security. The president has taken decisive action from the outset of this administration to put America back to work and get our economy moving again. This president has signed more laws slashing job-killing red tape out of Washington, D.C. than any president in American history. It's already saved businesses and individuals up to $18 billion a year in regulatory costs. And our president's been busy unleashing American energy. He's opening the way for more offshore drilling, rolling back the Clean Power Plan, and the president's approved the Keystone and Dakota pipelines to strengthen the energy infrastructure of this nation. And speaking of infrastructure, President Trump has already begun the process of rebuilding American infrastructure. And in partnership with governors like you, I promise you, before this session of Congress is out, we're going to pass an infrastructure bill that will rebuild America. And we're going to work with each and every one of you to bring that about. This president has also taken decisive action to ensure that America's trade deals are both free and fair. And thanks to the president's leadership, last month, American companies were able to ship American beef to China for the first time in over 13 years. The president's also opened up a new economic dialogue he asked me to lead with the nation of Japan to strengthen our trade relationship with our valued ally. And in the coming weeks, President Trump and our nation will renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. And under this president's leadership, we will modernize NAFTA for the 21st century so it is a win-win-win for all of our trading partners in North America. Now, I know you'll be hearing from Prime Minister Trudeau in just a few minutes, and let me assure you, the United States and Canada have already built a remarkably strong relationship under these two leaders, and the investment relationship that we enjoy today is worth more than $620 billion a year, and we're grateful. We're grateful for the Prime Minister's leadership and his early outreach to this administration. President Trump recognized that every trade relationship can improve, and as the Prime Minister knows, we're looking forward to bringing NAFTA into the future in a way that will equally benefit both our countries. The truth is, President Trump's leadership is already making a difference, and I know you see it in your states every single day. Under this president's watch, businesses large and small have already created more than 800,000 new private sector jobs since the first of this year. Company after company are making record investments in state after state, billions of dollars, tens of thousands of jobs, and the stock market is soaring, closing at record highs again this week. And with the continued input of America's governors, President Trump is going to work with this Congress to drive forward an agenda for a more prosperous America, of lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy, better infrastructure, better trade deals. And yes, President Donald Trump is going to lead this Congress to rescue the American people from the collapsing policies of Obamacare. You know, as a former governor myself, I know just how important health care is to each and every one of you as you lead your states. The simple truth, though, is Obamacare is imploding all across America. And working families and small businesses are paying the price every day. Our administration has found that the average premium on the individual market has more than doubled since Obamacare went into effect less than 4 years ago. And in many states, including some represented here, it's more than tripled. When Obamacare passed, we were promised that families would save up to $2,500 a year in premiums. But the average Obamacare plan today costs nearly $3,000 more than the average plan did in 2013. And while costs are skyrocketing, choices are plummeting. On Monday, our administration announced that 38% fewer health insurers plan on participating in Obamacare exchanges next year, and the number could rise, leaving millions of Americans with even fewer choices. And come next year, 40% of American counties, including 9 whole states, will have only one choice in a health insurance provider, meaning they essentially have no choice at all. Even worse, dozens of counties will have no health insurance providers whatsoever on the Obamacare exchange in 2018. I know you know these facts because as governors, you're living that reality. Not far afield in Washington, D.C. looking at statistics, but you're seeing the impact of these failed policies each and every day in communities and enterprises across your state. I don't have to tell any of the governors gathered around here, whatever your politics, whatever your party, you know we're talking about real people, and you know we're talking about a real crisis. Because behind every number is a name, Behind every name is a story. You know, since early this year, the President's had me traveling across the country to many of your states, and I've always made a point to sit down with your local citizens and local businesses to hear the story about the hardship that Obamacare has placed in your communities. I've heard stories from small business owners, working families, and parents with disabled children who've suffered terribly under the collapsing weight of this policy. People like Julie Roberts, who I met with earlier this week in Lexington, Kentucky. At her small business, premiums have spiked 25% every year under Obamacare, and deductibles have tripled. Then there's Connie Mays, who's lived in the same small town in Ohio her entire life. She has a disability she told me about. It's made her life tough, but she's found her way forward. But when Obamacare became law, she told me that she lost her health insurance plan, she lost her doctor, and today, no health care provider in her county will take her Obamacare coverage. So she essentially has no coverage at all. She literally had tears in her eyes sitting next to me at the White House when she told me the story that card in her pocketbook was essentially meaningless because no one in her home county would take it. Then there's Julie Champagne from Wisconsin, who I met when I was visiting with Governor Walker, whose health insurance costs increased so much that last year she told me, with genuine emotion in her voice, that she had to choose between paying for her Obamacare coverage and buying Christmas presents for her grandkids. She literally took that preemptive 3 months where she could skip making her payments and skip coverage just so she could afford to buy some Christmas presents for her kids and grandkids. I don't have to tell all of you. I mean, these stories are not rare, but they're all heartbreaking. They're not the exception, they're the rule. As I told each and every one of those that I mentioned and people all across this country, help is on the way. We're going to give the American people access to the kind of world-class health care every American deserves. I'm pleased to report, as you already know, just yesterday, Senate leadership unveiled a new version of the Senate health care bill, and President Trump and I urge every member of the Senate to support it. President Trump and I believe the Senate health care bill is the right bill at the right time to begin the end of Obamacare and rescue the American people from this failed policy. And we look forward to the Senate taking up this bill as early as next week. Now, President Trump laid out his vision for American health care months ago. The president said he wanted a health care system that, in his words, is, quote, far less expensive and far better. And we believe the Senate health care bill begins to make the president's vision a reality. The bill introduced in the Senate puts America back on the path to better, more affordable health care for every American. The Senate health care bill repeals Obamacare's individual business mandates and cuts taxes on American families and American businesses, restoring freedom, and it'll create jobs. The Senate health care bill doubles the contribution limits for health savings accounts, and for the first time ever, it allows health savings accounts to cover insurance premiums. The bill also offers tax credits to help Americans buy the coverage they want at a price they can afford. And the legislation ensures that every American with pre-existing conditions has access to the coverage and care they need, no exceptions. And if you take nothing else from what I say today, know that the Senate health care bill gives states the freedom to redesign your health insurance markets. And most significantly under this legislation, states across the country will have an unprecedented level of flexibility to reform Medicaid and bring better coverage, better care, and better outcomes to the most vulnerable in your states. Now, I'm not speaking so much right now as your vice president, but let me speak to you as a former governor and as someone who Terry McAuliffe pointed out. I made the decision in Indiana to expand Medicaid under a waiver. I mean, you all know your states, you know your people. You know how to create the innovative solutions to address the unique health care needs of the people of your states, and I had the very same attitude when I was a governor. Most of you also know that under previous administrations, frankly, in both political parties, it's been difficult, if not at times impossible, for states to act on your own ideas. I actually learned that firsthand. Right after I was elected governor in early 2013, I went straight to work developing a serious Medicaid reform plan that would put vulnerable and low-income Hoosiers more in charge of their own health care decisions. It would expand access to health care providers across the state. Working with a remarkably talented woman who I'm proud to say is now the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, we created a plan based on consumer-directed health care. Indiana at the time, as some of you know, was home to a small pilot project that had promising results in that area. And we believed that we could expand coverage in the state the Indiana way, in ways that would improve access and improve health care outcomes for our most vulnerable. And we went straight to work. But when we submitted our waiver to the prior administration to implement our plan, we, as many of you can attest, in prior administrations, we encountered roadblocks and bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. It took our state more than 2 years for the federal government to approve our waiver. And even then, they frankly rejected an awful lot of what we were trying to do. I know many of you have submitted waiver requests over recent years to Washington, D.C. and had the same result. Now, President Trump and I both believe that governors should have the freedom to design and implement the reforms in health care that will work in your states, and we're going to fight to make that a reality in Washington, D.C. President Trump is dedicated to getting the federal government out of your way and allowing you to develop those unique solutions that will work for the people of your state. As the President told you in February, the federal government, in his words, should be not in your way, but working with you to deliver needed reforms and services. And that's our commitment again today. Now, tomorrow you're going to hear from Secretary Tom Price from the Department of Health and Human Services, who accompanied me here today, and Administrator Seema Verma about our President's commitment to work with each and every one of you. Earlier this year, they sent a letter to every governor in America, in their words, to affirm the President's partnership with all of your states. And I got to tell you, and I hope you've already had this experience, with Secretary Tom Price and Administrator Seema Verma, we've got the A-team. They're fighting for you. They're fighting for the state's ability to innovate and meet the needs of our most vulnerable and improve our health care system. And I'd like you to give them a round of applause. As you've heard from those cabinet officials, and I'm here to say again today, our administration wants you to innovate. We want you to improve your own health insurance markets and strengthen your Medicaid programs. And I promise you that this administration will work with you in a timely way so that you can move forward with the policies and plans that are best for your states and your citizens. And a case in point, just a few days ago, Administrator Verma approved a state innovation waiver for Alaska to lower premiums and improve access to care for thousands of Alaskans. And Governor, we commend you for your leadership. Our administration is committed to working with you as partners. And the good news is that the Senate's health care bill will expand state freedom and flexibility to an even greater degree than the law permits our administration to extend today. The bill actually rolls back restrictions on waivers, giving states the ability to stabilize your insurance markets after they've been virtually destroyed in recent years. And when it comes to Medicaid, not only does the Senate's health care bill expand state flexibility, it ensures that every state in America has the resources you need to take care of your most vulnerable. As a former governor who expanded Medicaid in our state with consumer-directed health care, I have to tell you, I understand and appreciate, as the President does, the concerns that many of you have as we talk about Medicaid in the future going forward. Our administration has paid very close attention to this issue, and we've had discussions with governors around this room and around the country. So let me be clear. President Trump and I believe the Senate health care bill strengthens and secures Medicaid for the neediest in our society. And this bill puts this vital American program on a path to long-term sustainability. Under the Senate health care bill, federal Medicaid spending will be $300 to $500 billion higher over the next decade relative to current amounts, ensuring that our states have the ability to provide for the most vulnerable and give them the care that they're counting on. Now, when it comes to receiving this funding, your states will have two options: a per capita cap or a block grant. The per capita cap gives each state the money you need to cover Medicaid's traditional beneficiaries who need the most assistance. And with a block grant option, you'll be able to determine how to best use your Medicaid dollars, and you can provide for your most vulnerable in ways that's best for your state. At the same time, the Senate health care bill creates a stability fund in addition to that states can use to help people obtain personal coverage as they transition out of the Medicaid expansion. People on Medicaid will be eligible for the new tax credits, which will help them purchase the affordable coverage that's right for them. The truth is, these reforms are long overdue. Under Obamacare, the Medicaid expansion costs 50% more per enrollee than what we were told. At this very moment, Medicaid is one of the largest and fastest growing budget items in nearly every state budget. But you already know that. And as Medicaid grows, there's less and less money for school, for roads, and for public safety. The truth is, for a long time, Medicaid's been a broken system that's been fundamentally unsustainable. And the expansion that occurred under Obamacare only made the system worse. This just can't continue. That's why the Senate health care bill puts Medicaid on a budget for the first time in its history, ensuring for the long run that Medicaid will be there for the neediest in our society. Obamacare has put far too many able-bodied adults on the Medicaid rolls, leaving many disabled and vulnerable Americans at the back of the line. It's true, and it's heartbreaking. I know Governor Kasich isn't with us, but I suspect that he's very troubled to know that in Ohio alone, nearly 60,000 disabled citizens are stuck on waiting lists, leaving them without the care they need for months or even years. Just a few weeks ago at the White House, I met just such a family from a state that had expanded Medicaid, Christine and Jacob Chalky. Now, they're a beautiful family, but they have a heartbreaking story, and it's one that America needs to hear. Jacob is Christine's son, a courageous young man in his early 20s. He has a rare disability, and for nearly his entire life, he depended on Medicaid in his state for the medicine that he needs. But a few years back, when their state expanded traditional Medicaid, the state also announced that they were going to cut back on coverage for medication like Jacob's. One day, Christine told me, with tears in her eyes as well, that she got a letter in the mail saying that the state would no longer pay for Jacob's medicine. The family tried as hard as they could to get enough money together, but they just couldn't do it. They had to switch to a different, cheaper alternative that might not work, and sure enough, it didn't. Young Jake's health began to fail, she told me. He even lost his ability to see, to walk, and to talk. Only by the grace of God did he regain these skills, and a loving family was there at his side. But every day is now a struggle for him and their family. I mean, Jake is not alone. I mean, the truth is, I've heard from special needs families as I've traveled all across this country, and they've told me again and again that unless we reform Medicaid, our most vulnerable are going to continue to be crowded out of coverage that they rely on and depend on. I don't have to ask any one of you to know where your hearts are on this issue. You know Medicaid was created in the very instance of its founding to support the aged, the blind, the disabled, and vulnerable children. And unless we bring about needful reforms that you alone in your state know how to best implement, we're going to continue to see scarce resources crowd out the help that our most vulnerable need. And I know that no one around this table, no one sitting in a governor's office in our states or territories wants that to happen. This demands a compassionate response. I know all of you care deeply about those families. You want to provide for them and give them the best shot at a better life. I say that with confidence because I know all of you. Beyond the politics that may separate us, I have to tell you that being among governors was one of the most inspiring times in my season of public service. Because as Gene and I were talking earlier, governors are doers. You roll your sleeves up more often than not, you just check your politics at the door and go figure out how to solve problems. And this room is filled with men and women who are problem solvers. So I want to say this is your chance. The Senate health care bill restores Medicaid to its original purpose, caring for the disabled, the blind, the low-income, elderly, pregnant women, and children. And we can put you back in the driver's seat to making sure that it does just that. I really believe, as the president does, that we're saving Medicaid. for the sake of our most vulnerable and all that depend on it. We're providing all Americans with access to high quality and affordable health insurance with the reforms that are moving through Congress today. I mean, this really is about caring for the least among us, and it's about doing the right thing. And at the end of the day, I know in my heart of hearts, the men and women around this table, and everyone in public service at every level, longs to do just that. Before I leave, I'd like to mention one more accomplishment in the Senate health care bill that I know is of great interest and has already been a subject of discussion appropriately at this gathering of the National Governors Association. I'm pleased to report that the new Senate health care bill provides unprecedented new resources to address the opioid crisis that's ravaging our states and communities across this nation. The President and I are grateful for each one of your leadership on this issue. And in my days back in the Hoosier State, I sat around kitchen tables with families that were dealing with the loss of a loved one to opiate addiction, or dealing with the long, long road back from opiate addiction and abuse. Now, you all would be glad to know that President Trump has made a priority of this administration to end the scourge of opiate addiction in this country. He knows the impact that it has on families, and we're determined in this administration to bring the full resources of the national government to bear on assisting you as you come alongside these families. President Trump has been giving our law enforcement community at every level the resources and backing they need to go after this on the law enforcement side. We've been getting gang members, drug dealers, and violent criminals like MS-13 off the streets of our city at an unprecedented pace. The President has also created a commission devoted to addressing the opioid crisis, because we know that we have to meet this crisis not just with law enforcement, but also with compassion and with new resources for those that are caught up in the scourge of addiction. With this President's support, the Senate health care bill unveiled yesterday a remarkable $45 billion in new federal resources to confront opiate abuse and addiction in our states. And when this bill is signed into law, every state in America will benefit from this funding. And passing this bill is a vital step to help those who suffer in the grip of addiction in our communities and our country, and put our entire nation back on the road to healing. You know, as the governor and I were just talking a moment ago, once again in your state, after Congress passed the CARES Act last year, you're going to have the ability with these new resources to look at issues like not only treatment, but also treatment centers, to build further capacity in your states, to make resources available for people and their families to deal with the scourge of addiction. And we know your leadership will make a difference in lives. The bottom line, the Senate health care bill provides for the most vulnerable in our society. It improves and strengthens Medicaid. It gives you, America's governors, the flexibility you need to bring better care, better coverage, and better outcomes to the citizens of your states. President and I truly believe it will be a historic day for American health care when the President has the privilege to sign this bill into law, and we commend it. We commend this bill to your attention, and we ask for your support. But today, I want to ask all of you to continue to work with us, to build on the good work being done in this Congress on health care and on so many other issues. I want to challenge each one of you to work together with this administration, to give the American people access to the world-class health care they deserve, and to move forward the kind of policies that will strengthen our nation, strengthen our economy, and advance the security and safety of the American people. But we truly do believe now is the time to act in the Congress on health care reform for the sake of the American people. Now is the time to usher in a new era of state-based innovation. Now is the time to make the best health care system in the world even better. And as I close, let me again thank you for the warm welcome today and the good fellowship. When I arrived today, one of my colleagues asked me if I missed you. And the truth is, I do. The privilege of serving as a governor of the state I grew up in was the greatest privilege of my life until that phone rang a year ago this weekend. But there's something special about governors. And I want you to know that President Trump and I know it. And we're just determined to seize this moment in the life of our nation to advance the interests and the well-being of the people of our country, and we ask for your support. And as I ask it, I say with confidence that I know we will succeed as we confront the challenges in healthcare and beyond, because I have faith. So with boundless faith in the American people, with faith in you men and women in this room who lead the great states of this union, with faith in our President's vision and determination, and with faith in God who has ever watched over this land of the free and home of the brave, I say with confidence, we will make America safe again. We will make America prosperous again. We will give Americans the opportunity to have access to world-class health care again, and to borrow a phrase, working with all of you on behalf of all of the American people, we will make America great again. Thank you very much. God bless you for your service to this nation. God bless you, states, and God bless the United States of America.
They're only going to give me so much time with the seal here, so. Oh, come on, can I have it for a few more minutes? I want to thank the Vice President. If we give him one more great round of applause, I thank him for coming up to address the governors and understand the challenges that the governors have in dealing with all the issues. And I appreciate a discussion of the opiate crisis, which every single governor sitting around this table understands and deals with on a daily basis. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone very special. I am honored. This is the first time in NGA history that we have had a head of state address the National Governors Association. And it's only fitting that we have the Canadian Prime Minister to address us today, because in America, you think of that relationship that we have with Canada, not only the gigantic border that we share together, but also the friendship. I do not believe there is a better bilateral relationship between two countries in the entire globe that exists between Canada and the United States of America. And I specifically want to thank the Prime Minister, who has stepped out and led on such important issues of dealing with climate change, how to deal with extremism, working with us here in America. I want to thank the Prime Minister, making sure that Canada is open and welcoming to everyone. He's been a fighter to protect women's rights, to protect the rights of the LGBT community. He understands that when you're open and welcoming, good things happen. Your economies grow. And most importantly, I want to thank the Prime Minister for his leadership on the economy, our top trading partner, such a vital partner to all of us around this table who have to grow and create jobs. I personally, as the Governor of Virginia, want to thank the Prime Minister for the 600,000 Canadians that came to visit Virginia last year and spent $214 million. They bought our beer, they bought our wine, our peanuts, they went to our beautiful mountains, they went to Virginia Beach. As I always like to say, you come to Virginia Beach, we don't have sharks at Virginia Beach. We have dolphins. They come, they pick up your children, they give them rides, they drop them back off. But every governor has a similar story how important Canada is. So it is my distinguished honor as chairman of the National Governors Association, on behalf of all the governors, to introduce to the stage for the first time ever a head of state, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Vice President Pence, governors, friends, honored guests, good afternoon. It is my sincere privilege to be here with you today to talk about some of the values we have in common and some of the solutions to the challenges we all face. Governor McAuliffe, thank you for your kind words of introduction and your thoughtful opening remarks. Governor Raimondo, thank you for your warm welcome and this extraordinary Ocean State hospitality. It's high summer here in Rhode Island, land of perfect sun, sand, and surf. I have to say I'm a little bit flattered and also a little bit surprised that so many of you in the audience have chosen to be here now rather than at the beach. But maybe that's on the agenda for this weekend. Or maybe, like me, you agree with Wallace Stevens that perhaps the truth depends on a walk around the lake. And I have to tell you, Wallace Stevens is my favorite American poet. By day, he worked in insurance up the road in Hartford, Connecticut. And by night, he wrote some of the most thoughtful poetry this country, and indeed our world, has ever seen. As I get to know this beautiful, historic corner of America a little better, the neatly tended fields and low stone walls, the apple orchards and spectacular ocean vistas, I've been thinking a lot about Wallace Stevens. In his poem, Theory, he declares, "I am what is around me." And it makes me think of the concept of home, what it means, and how we define it. Of course, home begins with family. It extends out from there to school and places of worship, workplace, community, city, state, and country. But there's an aspect of home that goes beyond our national borders, at least beyond the Canada-US border, which is unlike any other. That is the idea and the reality of our common North American home. This is where Newfoundlanders took in thousands of stranded American air travelers after 9/11, as chronicled in the award-winning Broadway musical Come From Away, which you really should all see. It is where 100 years ago, New Englanders rushed to help their Nova Scotia cousins after the Halifax explosion of 1917. We saw it just a few weeks ago when the Plymouth to Newport sailing race got hit with hurricane-force winds, and Canadian Armed Forces personnel, ships, and planes went immediately into rescue mode. That's what friends and neighbors do for one another. We're there for each other. We step up. The Canada-US border is sometimes referred to as the longest undefended border in the world. That's actually wrong. Our shared border is very well defended. We defend it together against common threats. From NORAD, the only joint command relationship in the world, to NATO, to counterterrorism, to basic street-level policing, Canadians and Americans work shoulder to shoulder, keeping each other safe. As long as any of us here can remember, and further back than that, we have done this. And that is the context into which I'd like to say a few words today about Canada's outreach to the United States this year, which has variously been described by analysts and pundits as un-Canadian, exceptionally Canadian, unprecedented, highly predictable, and perhaps most colorfully, a donut. In that one, I suspect you governors are all the sprinkles, but you know. My friends, I'm here to tell you that our continuing conversation with all of you is none of those things. Not at all. On the contrary, it is consistent and solid through and through. And I need to highlight the work of two individuals here as being exemplary throughout this process. Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, and our Ambassador to the United States, David McNaughton. Thank you both for your terrific work. But we all know that Chrystia and David are not alone in this. It extends to all levels of governance and society. From my continuing constructive dialogues with President Trump and Vice President Pence, to chats between federal ministers and cabinet secretaries, to meetings between state governors and provincial premiers, including the Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, who's here with us today, to conversations between municipal leaders, to business and non-governmental organizations, and to the thousands of personal and business ties that form the bedrock of our national bond. During my time in politics, I've noticed this. Pundits, and I say this with the greatest of respect and affection to our friends in the media, really seem to enjoy the word strategy. If you have a plan, it's just a plan. Anyone can have a plan. But if you call it a strategy, well, suddenly journalists are leafing through Sun Tzu's The Art of War and making oblique references to chess. It has the effect of making the obvious seem complex, or at least fancy. It makes for an interesting story. But our strategy, our plan, is actually extremely straightforward. Canada is a confident, creative, resourceful, and resource-rich nation. We are a wealthy and influential country by world standards. We are also a country of 35 million people living next door to one roughly 10 times our size and the world's only superpower. My father, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, once compared this to sleeping next to an elephant. But while you, my American friends, may be an elephant, Canada is no mouse. More like a moose. Strong and peaceable, but still massively outweighed. And so we need to work harder to make our points, to advocate for the interests of Canadian families in a way that will connect down here. That applies across the range of our national interests, from the fight against climate change, to job creation, to our common defense. Because, let's face it, this is another truth about good neighbors. Sometimes we take each other for granted. Sometimes the very dependability and ease of a relationship can lead to us paying too little attention. When that happens, the principals invariably live to regret it. My friends, we in Canada decided we would not allow that to happen to our relationship with the United States of America. And you'll allow me to say that again for the folks back home because it's important. Il s'agit d'un autre aspect de la relation entre bons voisins. Parfois, nous la tenons pour acquise. Parfois, la fiabilité et la facilité d'une relation peuvent nous amener à y accorder trop peu d'attention. Inévitablement, on en vient à regretter de l'avoir négligé. Mes amis, je peux vous dire qu'au Canada, nous avons décidé que nous n'allions pas négliger notre relation avec les États-Unis. When I talk about the importance of maintaining this relationship, I talk about it as a collective. I say we, because this sentiment extends throughout the cabinet and caucus I lead, but is actually bigger than our government or our political party. There is an extraordinarily high degree of support for this across Canadian society. I note, by the way, that we have representatives from two of our major political parties here today, members of Parliament Mike Lake, Brenda Shanahan, and Salma Zahid, as well as Senators Bob Runciman and Art Eggleton. Hello, and thank you all for being here. As I was saying, the Canada-US relationship is far too important for us to assume that Americans are as focused on it as we are, focused on just how interlinked our economies have become, and just how crucial this is to the prosperity and security of both sides of this border, especially for the middle class and those working hard to join it. Given the imminent modernization of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which we welcome, of course, we felt compelled to tell you Canada's story, specifically as it relates to the United States. It's a great story, and not just for the 9 million American workers whose jobs depend directly on trade and investment with Canada, but for all Americans. Now, some of you may have heard that last number before, along with the fact that 2/3 of American states have Canada as their #1 top export market. This may have something to do with the fact that we're repeating those numbers to US audiences every chance we can get. The export number is true, by the way, for a majority of the states represented here today, including Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Tennessee, Vermont, Virginia, and Wisconsin. To boil this down to one point, Canada is the US's biggest, best customer by far. We're a bigger customer than China by roughly $152 billion, bigger than Japan or the UK. No one else even comes close. In fact, Canada buys more from the US than China, Japan, and the UK combined. We've been consistent this year. Some might say relentless, but we're polite in our relentlessness because we're Canadian, in sharing that message, beginning in my regular dialogues with President Trump and fanning out from there. And let me tell you why. This is the most successful economic partnership in the history of the world. It's worth about $1 trillion each year, and most importantly, it's well balanced. More broadly, the North American Free Trade Zone is the biggest economic zone in the world, comprising a $19 trillion regional market of 470 million customers. The United States, Canada, and Mexico together now account for more than 1/4 of the world's GDP. Since the trilateral agreement went into effect in 1994, U.S. trade with your NAFTA partners has tripled. That accounts for millions of well-paying middle-class jobs for Canadians and Americans. Free trade has worked. It's working now. And those ties have grown well beyond direct trade. Canadians pay more than $500 million annually in property tax in Florida alone. And another 25,000 homes in Arizona are Canadian-owned. Something to do with the weather, I suspect. But NAFTA isn't perfect. No such agreement ever is. We think it should be updated and modernized as it has been a dozen times over the past quarter century. And I have every expectation that it will be, to the ultimate benefit of working people in all 3 partner countries. And I have to add this. We've been gratified by the serious, respectful response that our outreach has met at all levels of American government. We thank our counterparts in the Trump administration for that, and we thank all of you. The relationship between our countries is historic. It is a model to the world. It is of critical importance for people on both sides of the border that we maintain and indeed improve it. We must get this right. And sometimes getting it right means refusing to take the politically tempting shortcuts. more trade barriers, more local content provisions, more preferential access for homegrown players in government procurement, for example, does not help working families over the long term or even the midterm. Such policies kill growth. And that hurts the very workers these measures are nominally intended to protect. And once we travel down that road, it can quickly become a cycle of tit for tat, a race to the bottom, where all sides lose. My friends, Canada doesn't want to go there. If anything, we'd like a thinner border for trade, not a thicker one. And allow me once again to repeat that in French. La relation entre nos pays n'a pas d'égal. Elle sert d'exemple au monde entier et il est d'une importance critique pour les gens qui vivent des deux côtés de la frontière, qu'on la maintienne et en fait qu'on l'améliore. Il faut que ce soit fait correctement. Parfois, faire les choses correctement ne veut pas dire nécessairement emprunter le chemin le plus facile sur le plan politique, ni le chemin le plus court. Créer de nouvelles barrières commerciales, ajouter davantage d'obligations de contenu local, donner un accès plus privilégié à des acteurs locaux pour les contrats gouvernementaux, par exemple, n'aide pas les familles de la classe moyenne à long terme, ni même à moyen terme. Les politiques de ce genre affaiblissent la croissance et nuisent aux travailleurs qu'elles devraient protéger. Une telle approche peut facilement engendrer une dynamique de représailles mutuelles de laquelle personne ne sort gagnant. Now, there are some really great arguments to be made for keeping our border thin when it comes to trade, even as we improve cross-border law enforcement that makes Canadians and Americans safer. Our friends and partners in Michigan and Ohio know well the case of Magna International, a global automotive parts supplier headquartered in Ontario. Founded in 1957, Magna today employs nearly 140,000 workers in 29 countries. Half of those workers are here in North America. And Magna has 65 facilities in the United States, 60 in Canada, and 29 in Mexico. And here's the point. Magna's supply chain spans the border. To a car part, the border is invisible. Canadian components are repeatedly incorporated into more complex products before final assembly. A hydroformed upper cross member starts in Strathroy, Ontario. It's imported into Michigan for assembly into a carrier and then incorporated into a full front-end module in Ohio. Magna then sends the front-end modules to Chrysler for final assembly, and Chrysler exports the finished Jeeps right around the world. That's teamwork, my friends. Or take Can-Am Group, the parent company of Can-Am Steel. Can-Am is headquartered in Quebec. It employs roughly equal numbers of Canadians and Americans. Its plant in Point of Rock, Maryland, and Claremont, New Hampshire provide jobs that are vital to their communities. Can-Am's market is the construction industry, which is a North American-wide industry, by the way. There are literally too many examples of this to name, whether it's CN in Louisiana, or Hydro-Quebec in Maine, or Cott Corporation in Missouri, or countless other enterprises and projects across the states. Canadian energy, ingenuity, and capital are there helping you build America, just as American energy, ingenuity, and capital are in Canada helping us build our country. And this, ultimately, is why I have such confidence in our shared future and in the best efforts of every leader in this room and in Washington to nurture this relationship, to make it even better. We really are all in this together. Ambassador McNaughton remarked on the high degree of cooperation and collegiality among the state governors he talked to, including many of you. That pragmatic approach crosses party lines. And I know that's because, as governors, you face common problems and share many of the same goals. I know that you're focused on creating the conditions for good, well-paying jobs for the middle class in your states. Whether Republican or Democrat, in this economy, that's most likely your very first priority. Well, guess what? It's my first priority as well. President Trump has told us all that it's his first priority. We all have this in common. This challenge, how to ensure benefits of commerce and trade are more broadly shared so that every family can look forward to a brighter future, is among the most fundamental of our time. My friends, I believe to my core that the most important challenge we face as elected leaders is that of creating lasting conditions for prosperity and security for all our people in this, our shared North American home. By virtue of our geography, by virtue of our interlinked economies, this is work we are called to do together within a modernized, renewed, and strengthened North American Free Trade Agreement. So I will leave you with this. Let us meet this challenge. Let us keep talking as neighbors and friends should. Let us roll up our sleeves. Let's get to work, and let's keep making history together. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Mic check. Down the mics, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, that was a spectacular speech. Please give him another big hand. So I have the privilege of asking the first question, Mr. Prime Minister, and as Governor McAuliffe said, we as governors have waited 108 years for a foreign head of state to address us. And that's a lot of governors through the years. So a simple question, why us and why now?
I think one of the things that we're seeing is, I mean, there's an immediate context, but there's also a broader context. The immediate context is obviously, there's a lot of talk about NAFTA, about benefits or challenges around NAFTA, and for us, just sort of sitting back and hoping it all works out is not really the Canadian way. We have winters that are too harsh for us to be able to do that in general. So we reach out and we think and we plan, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to really step up our engagement across all different levels of the U.S. administration. As many of you know, we were extremely proactive in connecting with President Trump and his administration as they got up and running, but we also realized that connecting better with Congress, reaching out to states right across the country, working with governors, is something that happens every day at all levels of this relationship that we should be a little more thoughtful and deliberate about. And that's the specific context. But I think the general context is that we're in a world that is more and more interdependent, more and more interconnected, and in which people are more and more aware of the challenges that our communities or societies are facing, and more eager to see people working hard, rolling up their sleeves to try and address their worries about their jobs, their future, their kids' futures. And this level of interconnection and pooling of energies to meet these challenges, I think, is part of what citizens hope to see from their leaders in general.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for being with us here today. We appreciate everything that you said earlier. And what we're trying to do with this conference, it's got a big international flair to it. Obviously, you have spoken. We've got folks from Mexico here with us. We've got Vietnam. We've got China. We've got Japan. With the emphasis being that we want businesses and governments to deal directly with governors to grow our economies. Sometimes, I know, as it relates to trade, conflicting messages coming out of Washington today. I just got back last week from a 7-nation European tour everywhere, issues about a border tax and so forth. So what I've tried to convey is come directly to the states. We will do business with you. And I'd ask you today, Mr. Prime Minister, what advice would you give all of us governors? You are already our #1 trading partner, as you are for many of the states here. But as you envision the next 5, 10 years out, what advice would you tell us governors to increase how we do more business with Canada?
First of all, to reflect on what a lot of people take for granted, on how easy the relationship is with Canada. I remember a story of an American, and that goes on both sides of the border as well. I remember an American ambassador who explained to Canada, who explained to me that one of the first things he did was cross the country to try and drum up more business with the United States. And the number of people who said to him, as he was trying to say, you really should think more internationally. People said, no, we don't do any international sales. We just sell to the States. And the things we take for granted in terms of the easy proximity is something we have to be deliberate about, something we have to be thoughtful about and look for those opportunities. Look for the complementarities in our economy, and mostly think about reaching out. Encourage your business community, your chambers of commerce to go look at export possibilities with the United States, to welcome in visiting delegations from Canada, and to make Canada the first easy step towards the global economy for many of your small businesses. I mean, it's hard when we think of a global economy, when we think of the communications revolution, it's just as easy to sell your small business products across the street as it is to sell it around the world. You just have to shift your thinking, and if you can open your engagement at that level of already thinking of engaging with Canada and the opportunities there, it becomes then easier to really start to play in the global economy. On the flip side of things, the voices that governors have within the American system, both towards the federal government, but also connected with folks on the ground in your communities, whether it's business leaders or ordinary families and workers, you are better connected than some folks in Washington to the realities of people in their day-to-day lives, and being that bridge that is showing tangibly the benefits of trade, the benefits of a global perspective, and ensuring through the policy mechanisms that you have that the benefits of growth are being distributed and shared fairly amongst your citizens is something that governors have been and can continue to be extremely active on.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple governors' questions here. If any of our governors would like to ask the Prime Minister, anybody? Governor Raimondo.
Thank you. Prime Minister, that was an extraordinary speech, and welcome again to Rhode Island. We've spent an awful lot of time over the past day or so talking about the opioid overdose crisis here in America. I think every single governor around this table is struggling with it. Here in my own state, which is a state of only 1 million people, we've lost over 1,000 people to the disease in the past handful of years. And I know this is something that you've taken great action on, could you offer us your advice, what's working, and any words of wisdom that you have on this issue?
Thank you. The opioid crisis is hitting us extremely hard as well, to varying degrees across the country. And I was actually pleased that it was specifically one of the things that President Trump and I were able to agree on and coordinate and collaborate action on when I made my first visit to Washington a number of months ago. So it's something that I'm glad we're collaborating on, because whether it's issues around controlling borders and trying to stem the flow of fentanyl, carfentanil, and other opioids, whether it's looking at frontline policing or frontline first responders, making naloxone more available, or whether it's looking at harm reduction, which is something that we've had significant success with in Canada, which is looking at more safe consumption sites where people can be in a safer spot where they're going to be able to be treated if they get an overdose from bad products or overly concentrated opioids. We have solutions that we're happy to talk about and work with you on, and obviously the challenges will vary from region to region, from urban location to rural locations, but we are beginning to see that once what was concentrated in certain areas is now hitting broad communities, young people, suburban retirees, all sorts of folks across the country, and making sure we're thoughtful and coordinated in our approach to this crisis is something that, as good neighbors, friends, and allies, we should certainly be doing. And I welcome the money that's being put forward to it. We've put a lot of money forward towards it as well, but mostly the goodwill of people who are realizing this is a very serious health crisis we need to address responsibly and quickly.
I think we have time for one more. Any other governor here have a question? Governor Carney, thank you. Great state of Delaware.
A lot of tough negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which involve Canada and the U.S., particularly around agricultural products. Do you expect that these negotiations will take up where those left off?
Canada is a country that has understood from the very beginning how important trade is. We've always had more resources than our small population can use or handle, and we've always needed to be able to export our goods around the world. We have been extraordinarily fortunate to share the border with the United States, which means we have natural and always had natural connections with the American market, but we have also looked increasingly at engaging in the world. We just signed a historic free trade deal with the European Union, which certainly we're hoping is going to come into provisional application within a couple of months, which will have 99% of all tariff barriers disappear between our two countries, which would be good for our workers and our small businesses and large businesses, and good for our economies. But we're also very interested in trade with Asia. I think there is a a lot of interest in the TPP and furthering sort of the momentum that we had, understanding the U.S.'s position right now, but also knowing that trade matters and creating opportunities for new markets, creating opportunities for our small businesses and agricultural producers to sell into the growing middle class in Asia. I mean, we're talking about 300 million people, 400 million people in China alone who are joining the global middle class, who are very interested in lobsters from Nova Scotia or Maine, or cherries from Washington State or British Columbia. There are opportunities for us to engage with Asia, with China, or with the TPP countries that I'm very, very interested in. So we're open to engaging and discussing trade. I think the challenge that we face around trade is that, yes, as a succession of policymakers and governments have promised, trade has led to growth over the past decades. That's true. The problem, however, is trade has never been a guarantee that that growth would be fairly distributed amongst citizens. And the challenge we have now as governments responding to citizens who've said, you know what, maybe it hasn't worked out for us the way you promised it, and the wealthiest and the big countries seem to do well with, the big companies seem to do well with trade, but the rest of us aren't really seeing the benefits. It becomes really, really important that as we look at newer trade deals, at signing trade deals, at improving deals like NAFTA, we think right up front about how to make sure that the benefits of the growth that will come from trade, inevitably, accrue to more of our population. And you combine that concern with trade with the reality of automation and AI, we realize that the workplaces are changing. We need to be investing in education and skills training, in creating confidence amongst our citizens that we are building for their future and not just a short-term bottom line. And that's the challenge of leadership that we all face right now, which is both demonstrating the concrete benefits of policies, plans, including trades, but also selling it, reassuring people, showing that we can build and solve these challenges together as we have in the past, as opposed to giving in to fear or anxiety or anger. And that's always the challenge of leadership. People might be worried, might be anxious, concerned about the future. How do we take that energy and push it forward into policies that are actually going to help our citizens, help our companies, help our economies? And that's where, whether it's the TPP, whether it's trade deals around the world, or whether it's just this extraordinary relationship between Canada and the United States, this is where our energies and our efforts must lie, in demonstrating and focusing on the benefits for all of our citizens.
Ladies and gentlemen, please again join me in thanking the Prime Minister for being with us today.
Well, thank you. I'd now like to turn it over to Governor Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Governor McAuliffe. And I want to just personally recognize, I think on behalf of all of us, what an immense honor it was to have both Vice President Pence and Prime Minister Trudeau with us today. I want to take a moment just to thank them for sharing their time and their thoughts with us, and certainly we appreciate their presence. And with the Vice President on healthcare, we obviously still have a lot to discuss. I want to also thank all of our guests from Canada and Mexico. This is probably the largest turnout from those two countries that I've ever heard of. And I want to just take a couple minutes to focus on those relationships. And as the Prime Minister said so eloquently, trade creates wealth. And in trade, or as in automation or other innovations, there can sometimes be significant job displacement. We as governors, whether Democratic or Republican, can do a better job and really have to do a better job at training and educating people of all ages for all the new jobs that are being created by this rapidly evolving global economy. Without any partisan bias, I think we all share in this responsibility. Also, as Prime Minister Trudeau said, we need to make sure that, I think his words were, that the benefits are more broadly shared among all our citizens. We believe that states and provinces can work together to achieve greater success for all the people we serve. This is precisely why Governor Herbert and I worked hard to develop the inaugural North American Summit of Governors that took place in Colorado Springs in 2015. Our vision was to establish a foundation, to establish a forum that helped to spur conversations that supported cultural and especially economic linkages between our states, our provinces, our countries. With bipartisan attendance at the 2015 summit, we were able to have meaningful discussions on innovation, infrastructure investment, trade, and to build relationships that in many cases are ongoing. And this all would come back to jobs. We certainly value the relationships that we have with the Canadian and Mexican companies that operate in Colorado, and I know all the other governors feel the same way. We also know so many of our own companies and industries benefit from access to those neighboring markets. In Colorado, beyond the fact that Canada and Mexico are our largest trading partners, Colorado businesses export more than $2.4 billion in goods in 2016. In Denver, or in Colorado, actually in several parts in Colorado, we host every 2 years the Biennial of the Americas, or as in Spanish you would call it the Biennial de las Americas, to engage our neighbors in a week-long festival of culture and business innovation that seeks to celebrate the shared history and connectedness through the entire Western Hemisphere. And if any of you are bored that week in September 12th through 16th, would be a convenient time for you to come to Colorado. We know that through collaboration and trade and the sharing of ideas that we can achieve more, and we can expand opportunity not just for Coloradans and Americans, but for our partners in states and provinces beyond our borders. I want to again thank the NGA and Governor McAuliffe and Governor Sandoval for hosting this session, and to Governor Ducey for your partnership as co-chair of the NGA Economic Development Committee. I especially look forward to the NGA bringing the second North American Summit of Governors, which I hope and understand will be announced quite soon. So now I'll kick it over to our fearless leader, Scott Pattison.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be moderating this session, and we will start by having some special guests' remarks. And it really has been an extraordinary day where the first head of state speaks to the NGA as well as the Vice President of the United States. And we also, again, have some very special guests from Canada and Mexico. So I'm going to start and first ask the Chief Executive of Mexico City, Mayor Mancera, to say a few remarks. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon, Governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, Governor of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo, distinguished governors and premiers of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Today we are here for a historical significant summit convened by National Governor Association with great respect and admiration for this country and my capacity of chair of the State Governors of Mexico. I have the firm conviction that the states and provinces, as a local governments, are closer to and more in tune with the real needs of the people. We understand the priorities of the people that we represent for the purpose of modernizing NAFTA. The governors and premiers of Canada, the United States, and Mexico know in great detail the needs of the local economies. We understand the factors that need to be promoted to manage a fair, just, and equitable economic development for our people. The modernization of the North America Free Trade Agreement is a historic opportunity to come together again, renew our relation, come to a new consensus, and move beyond our differences. I come to propose that the state should have a fundamental role in the modernizing NAFTA. The governors of Mexico agree that our state governors organization should be included to this free trade agreement. Mexico is a key player and gateway to commerce with the United States and Canada. We are the second largest export market for the United States and Canada's third largest commercial partner. Because of NAFTA, commerce Mexico and the United States is almost $500 billion each year, representing $1 million per minute. Contrary what some suggest, the United States has been a great beneficiary of the free trade agreement with Mexico. After more than 20 years of open trade, 5 million jobs in the U.S. today depend on trade with Mexico. In regard to Canada, in 2016, commerce between our two nations reached a record $34.7 billion. This is an undeniable sign to the commercial integration is the best way for foster economic growth. As chair of the governor of Mexico, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the premiers of Canada, obviously the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They have proven to be open and receptive to Mexico's call to the continuation of NAFTA. Beyond the consequence on trade, an abrupt change to NAFTA would imply other threats that can also affect our fellow citizens. Millions of Mexicans who live in the U.S. live in fear. They came to this country with the dream to building a better future. Today, 10% of the U.S. economy depends on this workforce. Mexico and the United States shared a rich history as neighbors, ties to Mexico and its cultural heritage, and a fundamental part of the Hispanic community in the United States. The fear of being deported, whoever remains, as a constant threat to same of our fellow Mexicans. We migrate to this country looking for better opportunities. I would like to take this opportunity to address our immigrants, our Mexican workers. You are not alone. The governors of Mexico will strive to defend your dignity and your rights. There are countries that want to close their door, but Mexico will always be an open door, promote open trade and open borders. We will never accept discrimination or hate. The National Conference of Governors of Mexico stand in this forum with the conviction that we'll achieve our agenda in the modernization of North American Free Trade Agreement. The governors of my country are here to demonstrate the unity makes us stronger. As a region, we are ready to take charge of our future. Before you, as a political representative of the United States and Canada, we propose the following. We must put our faith in a united, integrated North America. In this global moment, it is critical to come into and intelligent economic development, in which we can take advantage of the strengths of our three countries and integrate our economies into a strong commercial bloc. Mexico, the United States, and Canada should advocate for a region without tariffs in which each country enhances and maximizes its competitive advantages in the global market. We are stronger if we remain together. New and improved labor practices for the three countries. While Mexico has experienced a significant economic growth since NAFTA, it is important to recognize that not all this growth has been for everyone. The reality in my country is that since the integration of Mexico to the global economy, we have seen our labor legislation fail to address and guarantee the stability and rights of our workers. Mexico requires a significant salary and minimum wage recovery. The governors of Mexico and I are convinced that this is the only way to improve our internal and regional labor markets. CONAGO believes that the foreign investment in Mexico can boost the qualification of Mexican labor and not focus on low wages. Lastly, I would like to conclude by recognizing the state that we are in, Rhode Island, the place, the concepts of popular and democratic government and individual freedom were first introduced since its founding in 1641. May these values that inspire the birth of this land be the guide for this forum and allow us to meet the challenge ahead. Yo estoy seguro que si todos trabajamos juntos y hoy en español todos repetimos esta palabra de trabajar juntos, podemos lograr todas las metas que nos propongamos. Hoy la CONAGO, la Asociación de Gobernadores de México, viene con ustedes agradeciendo esta importantísima oportunidad en este importante foro para hablar con los gobernadores, para hablar con los representantes del pueblo norteamericano. Juntos podemos hacerlo y estoy seguro que juntos lo vamos a lograr. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mayor Mancera. And folks may be interested to know, as chief executive, he is unique in Mexico in that he is considered a governor also and is chair of the Governors Association of the country of Mexico. Now, we are very pleased to introduce for remarks the 25th Premier of the largest province of Canada, Premier Kathleen Wynne.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thanks, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I know what you want from me is a really long speech, but I'm going to disappoint you. I just want to make a few points, but I want to begin by thanking Governor McAuliffe, Governor Sandoval, and Governor Raimondo, and Scott for this event. The sessions have been terrific. It was very helpful in my role as Premier of Ontario to hear people's shared experience on the opioid crisis. We are dealing with many of the same situations. Had a great opportunity to listen to folks talk about cybersecurity. So again, it is very, very helpful to be able to hear best practices, and so I thank you for the warm welcome. We've just heard from Prime Minister Trudeau, so the first thing that I want to do is just to say that I'm here on behalf of Ontario, so we're, as Scott has said, the largest province in the country, about over 13.5 million people, and I'll be debriefing with my colleague premiers next week, actually. We are having our our meeting that is parallel to this one, and so I'll be talking to them about the conversations that I have had here. I've had an opportunity to meet with many of you, and I appreciate that so much. All of the heads of Canada's provinces and territories, without exception, I can tell you, recognize the importance, as the Prime Minister has articulated today, the importance of our relationships with the states and with the United States as a whole. So there's not one of us that would not articulate that. So trade will be a top agenda item when we meet next week, and I will certainly be talking to my colleagues about the conversations that I've had here. We are, as I said, the largest province in the country, and that's by GDP and population, and the United States is our biggest trading partner. And I just want to give you an example that builds on something that that Prime Minister talked about in terms of the auto sector. He used the auto sector as an example, and I know that many of you have heard the stat that vehicles cross our borders 7 times before they are completed. And so the relationship with the United States and with Mexico for Ontario is absolutely critical. We see ourselves in that supply chain, not just in the auto sector, but in so many of our sectors. And to exemplify that, I signed a memorandum of understanding with Governor Snyder of Michigan some time ago. And so it is about expanding those trade opportunities, but more than that, it's about sharing the capacity to innovate, sharing information, having partnerships that allow us to grow that pie. A number of meetings that I've had today, we've used the expression, this is not a zero-sum game. And I think that that is fundamental to these conversations. If we see this relationship in North America as a zero-sum game, then it will be competitive. It will be that race to the bottom that the Prime Minister was talking about. It will degenerate into a trade war. That's not what any of us want. And so the fundamental assumption that together we can grow that pie, that there is the possibility for growth for this North American region, I think is critical. And so that's why I've been so intent, and I have been part of that strategy of relentlessness that the Prime Minister talked about. I've met with so many of you, and I apologize for chasing you down, sort of, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's so important to us, and I think it's important to all of us. The second thing I wanted to say is just I have been very, very focused on the importance of the subnational relationships. So to go back to one of the questions that Governor McAuliffe asked of the Prime Minister, I'm just going to build on the answer that the Prime Minister gave and say that I think one of the things that we can do is we can have those strong subnational relationships. So state to province, municipalities working together. I think that because we all understand as premiers and governors, and when I'm explaining to young people in the States what a premier is, I say a governor, but with no mansion. So I think that we can understand directly from our stakeholders what the implications of decisions are and how we're going to implement the decisions that are made. And so I think it's extremely important that we recognize those subnational relationships. And so I notice in our conversations that we are grappling with the same things. I talked about the opioid crisis, but I've had a number of conversations where the trade discussion has gone into an education discussion because we're talking about training our workforce and how do we, Governor Bevan and I were talking earlier about the relationship between the labor market and our educational institutions and tightening those connections. Governor Reynolds, I did drop by the girls, the coding session, and women in STEM, how, that's something that we're all dealing with. How do we make sure that that there are more women in those seats and taking part in that part of the economy? And so we're investing heavily in Ontario, in our people, and in their skills, and in their training opportunities. We're providing free tuition as of this September for college and university, for young people in the lowest socioeconomic brackets, and also for people who are retraining, people who are going back and aren't able to pay for their tuition. So we believe that our people are absolutely our most important asset, and I know that that's a shared value. So those are the kinds of things that I know that we're all grappling with. So it only makes sense that we would find ways to share best practices on those things. The third point I want to make is that it strikes me that on the issue of ensuring distribution of the benefit of the growth that we have seen, in Ontario we've had a great first quarter. Our GDP grew by 1%, but we're leading growth in the country. We're outstripping growth in terms of the G7, and so we are doing well in Ontario, but not everybody is benefiting from that. And so we are making decisions about that spreading of the benefit across the population that have to do with a fair economy, that have to do with an inclusive economy. And so we're investing in infrastructure, we're creating jobs. We're doing that in the form of P3s, and I've talked to a number of you about how we're working with the private sector to do that. But there is strong job creation happening because of that investment. We're in the fourth year of a $190 billion investment in infrastructure over 13 years. So that's a significant creation of jobs as a result of that investment. We're raising the minimum wage in Ontario. We're raising it by January 2019 to $15, and we have recognized that although we've seen our minimum wage increase over the last 10 years, we're still faced with a situation where people are not able to look after themselves and their families, and piecing together 2 and 3 jobs in order to do that. And so we don't take the growth for granted. We don't take the benefits of that growth for granted, and we believe that an inclusive economy is one that will continue to benefit all of us. So I'll just close by saying I've been speaking with leaders across the United States. I'm going to continue to do that. I believe in my heart and in my mind that these relationships are critical. I believe as we go into the NAFTA discussions, it is going to be absolutely essential for us as subnational leaders to be able to feed the information about what's going on the ground in our jurisdictions to our federal negotiators in a way that's going to allow them to represent our interests best at the table. There are going to continue to be challenging discussions. I absolutely understand that. But I also am very encouraged because of the conversations that I have had with so many of you and your colleagues that we all understand the importance of this relationship, and I am convinced that we are in each corner of this great continent. We're going to continue to work to make sure that these partnerships benefit all of the people who we represent. So I want to thank you so much, all of you, for the time that you have given us, and I look forward to continuing our work together. Merci, gracias. Thank you.
And yes, the Council of the Federation, which is the equivalent of the U.S. National Governors Association, is meeting in a couple of days.
Yes, I'll just go home and repack and leave for Edmonton.
We're very pleased. We have another governor from Mexico, Governor Domínguez of the state of Querétaro, and I'd like to say hello and welcome you.
Gracias, agradezco a la NGA por su invitación. Saludo a la voluntad expresada por el vicepresidente Pence y al primer ministro Trudeau. Saludo a Terry McAuliffe, gobernador de Virginia y presidente de la Asociación Nacional de Gobernadores de Estados Unidos. A nuestra distinguida anfitriona, a Gina Raymond, gobernadora de Rhode Island, a los gobernadores y primeros ministros, como integrante de la CONAGO y acompañado por el presidente de la CONAGO, Miguel Mancera, jefe de la Ciudad de México, agradezco esta invitación de diálogo que he escuchado franco, abierto y necesario. El Telecán resume sus grandes lecciones en una sencilla palabra: apertura. Creemos en la apertura y en la libertad, apertura en un sentido amplio. Apertura comercial, sí, aspiramos a mantenerla, pero sobre todo a profundizarla. Apertura financiera, apertura productiva, sobre todo apertura a recibir, a ponderar y aceptar las ideas de otros. Debemos de ser una región abierta que promueva sociedades, gobiernos y mantener abiertas al progreso, a la integración, a la innovación. Una región abierta que contenga comunidades de intereses, el respeto, la tolerancia, la libertad y la justicia. En Querétaro somos depositarios de los beneficios de esta visión. Un estado abierto y libre. Crecemos a tasas equivalentes a las economías del sudeste asiático. Somos líderes en la productividad, líderes en la investigación, líderes en la generación de empleos. La inversión que asienta en nuestro estado responde a cadenas existentes en todo Estados Unidos y Canadá. Es indispensable que entendamos la dimensión integradora en la región, tras ya casi un cuarto de siglo de libre comercio. La inversión se ubica en el lugar geográfico, pero los beneficios se derraman para toda la región. Y esos beneficios no conocen fronteras ni de idiomas. Construyamos cadenas no que aíslen, sino que nos unan. Cadenas de valor, innovación, conocimiento, producción, distribución, exportación. Es momento, sin duda, de revisar aquello que es susceptible de mejorar. Escuchémonos unos a los otros y asumir este momento con un espíritu de construcción. El Telecán marcó para bien una generación. El Telecán 2.0 tendrá que definirnos como jugadores claves del siglo XXI. Desde la firma del tratado, nuestros países han cambiado profundamente. Han cambiado también nuestras sociedades. Ha cambiado el mundo. Hoy tenemos una forma totalmente diferente de generar riqueza, de interrelacionarnos, de convivir, de comunicarnos. La ley, por naturaleza, debe de cambiar y adaptarse a las nuevas realidades. Solo que lo que no cambia también pues perece. México es un país que ha tenido cambios profundos, pero muy positivos, y hoy están marcando nuestro rol mundial. Somos una democracia, la alternancia política en México ya es un hecho cotidiano, la inversión privada ha crecido de manera exponencial, hay mayor libertad económica, hay sectores enteros que hoy están abiertos y son precisamente los que más han crecido en los últimos años. Los gobernadores de México vemos el proceso que arranca con una oportunidad única para poner énfasis en los intereses comunes, en nuestras fortalezas, en nuestras potencialidades, oportunidad para resolver diferentes sin poner el énfasis en ellas. Confiemos que la sensatez siempre brindará mayores y mejores frutos que la estridencia y la inteligencia que los perjuicios. Apostemos alto por una región renovada de producción, de trabajo, de libertad y no solo de comercio. Seamos una región abierta a las inversiones, al turismo, al comercio, al conocimiento, a la cultura, al trabajo. Seamos una comunidad de intereses, los de la ley, los del respeto y los de los derechos humanos. Somos una región democrática y libre. Somos la región más potente y próspera del mundo. Somos la región de ejemplo de innovación, de vanguardia y de integración. Somos la región más humana que requiere la siguiente generación para que vivan mejor y para que el mundo sea nuestro gran ejemplo. Muchas gracias nuevamente.
Here's the translation for you. Thank you very much to the NGA for inviting me. I'd like to greet Vice President Pence, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and particularly greetings to our distinguished host, Gina Raimondo, Governor of Rhode Island, and to Terry McAuliffe, our Governor of Virginia and Chairman of the National Governors Association of the United States, and attending premiers. As a member of CONAGO, and particularly as governor of the state of Querétaro, I recognize the high-mindedness of this National Governors Association. I especially recognize the willingness of each and every one of you to engage in this frank, open, and necessary dialogue. We must view ourselves as a region and as a community of interest. A regional approach entails an integrating vision beyond borders and differences, a vision which aids us in making the most common of our strengths, in building an expanse of development, well-being, and freedom. A community of interest means we must identify as partners and friends, as members of a society that shares values and aspirations. We can sum up the major lessons learned from NAFTA in one so simple word: openness. We believe in openness and freedom. Openness in the broad sense of the word. Openness to trade, for sure. We aim to maintain and deepen it. Openness to financing, openness to production, openness to migration, especially openness to receiving, considering, and accepting the ideas of others. We must be an open region, one which encourages open-minded societies and governments, collaboration, knowledge, competitiveness, progress, integration, and innovation. Investments made in my state of Querétaro are linked to a supply chains that stretch throughout the United States and Canada, as has been mentioned earlier. It is essential for all of us to grasp the scope of integration and how it has brought a quarter century of free trade. Investment takes place in a geographic location, but the benefits spill out throughout the entire region. And the benefits know no borders or language barriers. We must move from commercial exchange to integration of production. Value add, let's build chains which don't isolate us, but instead unify us. Value-added chains, chains of innovation, knowledge generation, production, distribution of exports. It is time, without question, to review what we can do better. Each party to the treaty may have its own position, and these positions, no doubt, will be addressed. But the most important thing is to approach this time with a spirit of building. NAFTA has left its mark for the better on a generation. NAFTA version 2.0 must define us as key players in the 21st century. From the time of the signing of the treaty, our countries have undergone profound change, as have our societies, and as has the world. Today, we have a totally different way of generating wealth by interconnecting, interacting, communicating. Law, by nature, must change and adapt to new realities. Only that which does not change perishes. Mexico is a country that has undergone profound and positive changes which shape our role in the world today. We are a democracy. Now it is an everyday occurrence in Mexico that political parties alternate in power. Private investment has grown exponentially now. There is greater economic freedom in Mexico. There are entire sectors which are open today, and these are precisely the ones that have grown the most in the past years. Governors view this process afoot as a unique opportunity. In order to emphasize common interests, our strengths, our potential, an opportunity to work out differences without focusing so much on them. We trust in sensibility. It will always yield greater and better fruits than will shrillness and stridence. And intelligence will always yield greater and better fruits than prejudice. Let's aim high for the sake of a renewed region of production, hard work, freedom, and not just freedom of trade. Let us be an open region to investments, tourism, trade, knowledge, culture, and labor. Let us be a community of interest, the interests of law, respect, and human rights. Let us be a democratic and free region, the most powerful and prosperous region of the world. Let us be the region setting an example of innovation, being at the forefront and integration. And to conclude, let us be the most humane region so that the next generation leads a better life and the world follows our lead.
Thank you, Governor. And now one of our leadership members, Governor Ducey of Arizona, who's co-chair of the Education and Workforce Committee, is going to address a question which I'll pose to him, which is a way to conclude this particular session. And that's this time of change with international trade presents obviously a lot of uncertainty for states. And there are so many issues. The states depend on trade for jobs and economic vitality. Arizona is no exception, Governor. So in your opinion, what is the single most important component for ensuring continued international success as we move forward?
Well, thank you, Scott, and Premier, Mr. Mayor, Governor, thank you very much for your comments. I don't think that there's any silver bullet as to what is the single most important ingredient for trade. I come from the private sector, and the first thing I did as governor was to look at our trade relationships, to look at our customers, so to speak. And I was able to see that Mexico was our #1 trading partner, and it wasn't even close. It was 4 times any other trading partner. So I knew that that was a relationship that I wanted to build and rebuild. And I also looked to Canada, which was one of our top 3 trading partners. And Premier Wynne, you were very gracious when we were able to come and visit. And it's a trip that we treasure very much, the relationships that we built. I started my career at Procter & Gamble, and we used to have a saying there that people do business with people. They do more business with people they like. And I think in the game of governments, they do more business with the people that they like and that they trust. So I was the first governor in the last decade to visit Mexico City. It was incredible, the reception, the welcome, the invitations that we received from their federal government. The country of Mexico does more trade with Arizona than it does with the entire Pacific Rim combined. Yet this was a relationship that was not being nurtured. So it's something we have paid great attention to. And I would say to all of my other brother and sister governors that are here, 33 of you enjoy a top 3 trading relationship with Mexico.
and I would encourage you to visit Mexico City. And we had the honor of having Carlos Slim, the leading businessman from Mexico, visit the state of Arizona in my first few months as governor. And I greeted him as he came to the state, and I'll never forget that the first thing he said to me was, "I'm pessimistic." And I said, "Why are you pessimistic?" And his answer was, "Well, because of the past relationship that we have had." And I said, "Well, I encourage you, please don't be pessimistic, be optimistic. I'm the new governor, and I'd like a fresh start." He reciprocated with a visit to Mexico City. We brought a delegation of business people, academics, and government leaders. And we brought government leaders that matched up peer to peer, tourism to tourism, law enforcement to law enforcement, commerce, authority, and economic development to economic development. This has resulted in several visits, resulted in my wife Angela and I attending the inauguration of Claudia Pavlovich, who's the first female governor in the nation of Mexico to be inaugurated in our sister state, the one just south of Arizona, Sonora. This has brought back to life something called the Arizona-Mexico Commission, something that was put together 57 years ago by my predecessor, Governor Paul Fannin, who said of Mexico that God made us neighbors, so let us be good neighbors. I've expanded on that a little bit because I think we're actually more than neighbors. Neighbors can actually move. We, through geography, have to find a way to work together. And Governor Pavlovich has been terrific. We, every 6 months, trade places as to where we hold the Arizona-Mexico Commission, both in her home country and in our home state. And we've done it consistently over the last 30 months as governor. It resulted in our last meeting of being over 600 people in Scottsdale, Arizona, in a standing room only 3-day plenary session of business people, academics, and government leaders trading ideas and best practices and building that relationship to the betterment of both of our peoples. And it has resulted in more jobs and prosperity for the state of Arizona with some specific wins, but I'll hold off on some of those anecdotes until later. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. I really wish we had more time. There's so much more that we could talk about, but I'll turn it over to Governor McAuliffe if he wants to close out this session. It's been a terrific afternoon.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody. This has been, I think, one of the greatest sessions we've had this all day today, the National Governors Association. I cannot tell you how much we all greatly appreciate everybody coming in. I think we have a press conference right now with some of the Premier and others who are going to be with us, and I appreciate that. But I just want to say on behalf of the NGA, we realize it is a global economy. We got to trade with one another. We got to be open and welcoming to one another, and that's how you grow your economies. And for us as governors and you, that's how you create jobs and grow your economy. So thank you very much, and I think we'll end the session now. Thank you.
Perfect.